On certain nights, when the wind slides through Lima's narrow colonial streets, the old stones seem to whisper. The city has changed, but its memories haven't. They cling to balconies, hide in courtyards, and sleep beneath the dust of mansions long abandoned. And if you walk those streets at dawn, some people say you can still feel the shadow of what happened on the first morning of August in the year 1803. It began long before sunrise. The servants of the Velasco household were the first to sense it, an uneasiness in the air like the house itself was holding its breath. A maid, barely awake, dropped a jug of water when she heard the Marchioness calling, her voice sharp, frantic, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Another servant ran, tripping over his own feet, because never in all his years had the Marchioness called for a doctor at such an hour. The grand mansion, usually a place of polished routines and quiet superiority, felt unsettled. The chandeliers above the corridors swung gently though no breeze touched them. The long curtains, embroidered with gold thread, swayed as if someone had brushed past, someone no one could see. The doctor arrived just as the sun's first rays touched the city. His horse was sweating, panting. He had been summoned with urgency, the kind that leaves no room for questions. And yet, the moment he stepped inside, he knew something was different. The servants didn't meet his eyes. Their hands trembled as they lit candles. The house felt bruised by fear. The Marchioness waited in her private chamber. Catalina de Agu Velasco, tall, regal, a woman whose presence alone could straighten a crooked spine. But this morning she looked smaller. Her hair was unpinned, her lips quivering, her hands clutching the armrests of her velvet chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Doctor," she whispered, "say nothing of what you see today." "Nothing." He nodded. Not out of obedience, but out of instinct. Something was very, very wrong. When he examined her, the room grew so quiet he could hear the dust dancing in the sunlight. Catalina stared at him, her breath shallow, waiting for the verdict she already feared. He swallowed. "Marchioness, you are with child." Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't scream. She simply closed her eyes as if a silent storm had finally broken inside her chest. But before she could speak, a knock sounded. Her eldest daughter. Then another. Her second daughter. Then a third. Her youngest. One by one, the doctor examined them, in a silence so dense it felt like the walls might crack under its weight. And each time, he felt the same cold wave wash through him. He didn't want to say it. But there was no escape. Each daughter, every single one, was carrying a child. And then came the moment that froze the blood of everyone in the room. The Marchioness demanded the truth, the kind of truth that terrifies both the asker and the one forced to speak it. "Is it possible," she whispered, "that the father could be the same?" The doctor hesitated. His hands trembled. "Yes," he said finally, barely audible. "All signs point to a single father." Catalina's breath left her body in a shudder. Her daughters stared at each other, their faces pale, haunted. Some looked afraid. Some, strangely, looked sorrowful. But the doctor wasn't finished. He cleared his throat. "The children's father, he is not European. Not even mixed blood." The Marchioness's heart stopped. She knew what he meant. And the moment she knew, she wished she didn't. "Who?" she demanded. "Say it." The doctor's voice cracked. "Domingo." The name fell like a stone into a still lake. Ripples of shock, horror, disbelief spread across every face in the room. Domingo, the young man who polished the silverware. Domingo, the one who carried firewood to the kitchen. Domingo, the one whose song-like hum could be heard in the corridors late at night. Domingo, the one they owned. An African slave. The Marchioness felt the world tilt. Her breath came in short gasps. She pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to keep her heart from leaping out. Her daughters lowered their heads, not in shame, but in a strange, aching sorrow. A gust of wind slammed one of the shutters. The candles flickered. And in that flickering light, the entire fate of the Agu Velasco family changed. Catalina whispered, "This will ruin us." And she was right. Outside the chamber, the servants pressed their ears against the cold wooden doors. Their faces reflected shock, fear, and something else. something like awe. Because they knew the truth before the Marchioness did. They had seen the secret glances. They had heard footsteps at strange hours. They had wondered why Domingo often looked conflicted, and why the young noblewomen carried a sadness in their eyes, the kind born of forbidden choices. But none of them imagined this. The doctor left quietly, but rumors don't walk, they run. And by midday, whispers had slithered out of the mansion like smoke. Whispers that the proud Marchioness had been betrayed, that her daughters had been seduced, that something unholy had infiltrated the noble bloodline. But the whisper that terrified the city the most, the whisper that made men put down their cups and women clutch their rosaries, Domingo, enslaved Domingo, is the father. That night the city didn't sleep. The governor's men wanted answers. Priests muttered about sin. Aristocrats clenched their jaws, terrified of what this meant, because if a noble house could fall so easily, what did it say about their own? And inside the mansion, the Marchioness sat alone in her dark chamber, staring at the doorway as if expecting someone, or fearing someone. No one came. Not her daughters. Not her servants. Not the night breeze that had so often comforted her. But she heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone was being taken away. Someone who didn't cry out. Someone who didn't beg. Someone who knew this moment was coming. Domingo. And when his footsteps faded, the house felt emptier, colder, as if a soul had been removed. In the silence that followed, the mansion of the Marchioness felt like a tomb. A tomb with 4 beating hearts inside it. The hearts of the women who carried Domingo's children. The mansion did not feel alive anymore. It felt like a creature wounded in the dark, its walls holding secrets too heavy to bear. The corridors that once echoed with laughter and music now held only shadows. And in those shadows, memories stirred. Long before the scandal broke, the Aguirre Velasco household had been a world of quiet routines and unspoken hierarchies. And in the center of that world, always moving silently, always present yet unseen, was Domingo. He had arrived at the mansion when he was barely a boy, sold from another estate, his origins wrapped in mystery. Some said he had once belonged to a Portuguese merchant. Others whispered he had been taken from a ship that never reached its intended port. But no one knew the truth, not even Domingo, who remembered only fragments. The creaking of wood, the endless sea, the sound of a woman singing in a language he could still hear in dreams but could no longer understand. In the mansion, he worked with a quiet grace that made him different from the other servants. He listened more than he spoke. He observed more than he reacted. He had the gift of moving through the house without disturbing the air, like a shadow that carried warmth instead of cold. The Marchioness noticed him first, not as a man nor as a servant, but as a presence. When grief had consumed her after her husband's death, the mansion had felt unbearably silent. Nights were long, heavy, suffocating. Every corridor reminded her of what she had lost. Servants tiptoed around her, afraid of her coldness, afraid of waking the anger she kept buried beneath her aristocratic calm. But Domingo, he moved without fear. He would pass by her chambers in the evenings, carrying candles or linens, and somehow he softened the silence around him. He hummed occasionally, low, rhythmic, soothing. A sound with no words, only feeling. The Marchioness had once asked him what the melody was. He had lowered his eyes and said he didn't know. It is something I remember, but not with my mind. After that night, she found herself listening for that hum, a sound that reminded her she was still alive. A sound that stirred something she thought had died long ago. It began innocently. A conversation here. A request there. A moment shared in grief. A moment shared in loneliness. And loneliness is a dangerous companion. The Marchioness never intended for anything to happen. Not at first. She told herself she admired his strength, his calm, his mystery. She told herself it was harmless to speak with him a little longer, to ask him to stay when she couldn't sleep, to let him accompany her to the balcony when sorrow tightened her chest. But the heart does not obey the mind. And forbidden things have a way of growing in silence. What the Marchioness never imagined was that her daughters were watching her more closely than she realized. The eldest daughter, Isabel, was the first to notice the warmth in her mother's voice when she spoke of Domingo. Isabel had always been sharp-eyed, the kind of young woman who studied people the way others studied books. She had lost faith in the noblemen her mother wanted her to marry, men who spoke with pride but loved with ego, men who wore perfume but carried cruelty behind their wrists. Domingo was different. He never raised his voice, never looked at anyone with arrogance. And when he smiled, rare, fleeting, it felt sincere. It felt real. Isabel began finding small reasons to cross his path. A book misplaced, a shawl fallen from a chair, a request for help with the garden her mother rarely visited. At first, Domingo avoided her, respectfully, even fearfully. He knew the boundaries of his place. But Isabel, she did not. She was young, gentle, curious, and curiosity is a seed that grows even without water. The second daughter, Elena, was not like Isabel. She was quieter, more fragile, a girl who lived in her imagination. To her, Domingo was a character from a story she had written in her head, a hero trapped in chains, misunderstood by the world. She didn't seek him out. She simply drifted toward him, like a feather drawn to a breeze. Sometimes she watched him from a distance, not with desire, but with the fascination of someone who had never truly seen another human soul before. The youngest daughter, Maria, she was the wild one. Rebellious, impulsive, easily wounded, easily angered. To her, the mansion felt like a cage. The rules of nobility suffocated her. She longed for anything that felt dangerous, different, alive. And Domingo was all three. It happened slowly. A conversation exchanged between sweeping steps. A shared glance when their hands brushed by accident. A tension that none of them dared to name. In a world that treated them like delicate decorations, Domingo was the first person who ever looked at them as people. And people, once seen, cannot return to being invisible. The Marchioness sensed something was happening, but she mistook it for admiration or curiosity. She didn't realize the truth until it was too late. Until each daughter, in her own way, slipped past the boundaries society had built around her. And maybe Domingo didn't want this. Maybe he feared it. Maybe he tried to pull away. Or maybe, after years of being treated as an object, he found himself overwhelmed by the sudden realization that he could be desired. That his presence could matter. No one will ever know the full truth. But the night everything changed was a night none of them would ever forget. A storm had rolled over Lima, rain hammering the tiled roof, thunder shaking the shutters. The mansion flickered in candlelight. Most of the servants hid in their quarters, terrified of lightning striking the house. But Domingo was called, first by the Marchioness who feared the storm, then by one daughter, then another, all seeking comfort, all seeking warmth, all seeking the presence of the one man who made them feel seen. A storm outside, and a storm inside the mansion. The events of that night would echo through the house for months. And when the Marchioness realized the consequences, for unborn children, she wished the storm had swallowed the house whole. Domingo didn't sleep the next night. He sat in the courtyard under the fig tree, drenched in rain, staring at his trembling hands. He knew what he had done. He knew the price. And he knew someone would come for him. And someone did. Footsteps approached at dawn. Not hurried. Not angry. Cold. Purposeful. He didn't run. He didn't plead. He simply lowered his head and whispered something no one else heard. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name, maybe a farewell. Then he walked away with the men who had come for him. And the mansion, once filled with hidden desires, collapsed into fear. The morning Domingo was taken away, the mansion held its breath. Not a single servant dared ask where he was being taken, nor did they dare speak his name aloud. It was as if the walls themselves had swallowed the sound of it. The Marchioness locked herself in her chamber. No food, no water, no visitors. Only silence. A silence so powerful that even the wind outside seemed too afraid to disturb it. But silence doesn't last forever. 3 days later, the eldest daughter, Isabel, found the courage to speak. She marched into her mother's chamber, pale, trembling, but fueled by something fierce. She didn't ask about Domingo. She didn't ask about her future. She asked only one question. Why did you let them take him? The Marchioness, who had spent 3 sleepless nights drowning in regret, stiffened. She tried to mask her fear beneath dignity, but Isabel noticed the panic beneath her mother's eyes. "You don't understand," the Marchioness whispered. "We had no choice. If the truth spreads, our family will be destroyed. All of us." But Isabel didn't accept that. She had always been the logical one, the strategist, the daughter who could dissect a political scandal like a surgeon. Yet when it came to Domingo, she felt something deeper than logic. "No," she said. "We could have protected him. You chose not to." The Marchioness closed her eyes and her hands trembled. She remembered the night the men came. They weren't strangers. They were men of influence, men with connections to the colonial government, men who assured her that the situation would disappear quietly if she simply cooperated. A scandal like this, with a slave, involving her daughters, would have ended their lives. That was what she told herself anyway. But guilt has a sharper memory than justification. She feared her own daughters. She feared what society would whisper about her. And in that fear, Domingo became a sacrifice. Isabel left her mother's room in tears, and that moment changed everything. The house no longer hid its fractures. They revealed themselves like cracks in porcelain, splitting wider with every passing hour. Elena, the quiet one, began waking in the night, crying out for someone she would never see again. She refused to eat. She refused to speak. She spent hours sitting by the window, clutching a scrap of linen Domingo had once handed her. It was all she had left of him. Maria, the wild one, became volatile. One moment she raged, breaking glass and tearing down portraits, and the next she collapsed, sobbing quietly in dark corners where no one could reach her. She didn't regret what she had done. She regretted what had been taken from her. And the youngest daughter, barely more than a child, did not understand her mother's fear or society's cruelty. She only understood that someone kind was gone, and it was because the adults were afraid of a truth she could not yet grasp. The Marchioness tried to keep control. She restored order among the servants, reinforced the routines, demanded discipline. But the tighter she held the family together, the more violently it seemed to unravel. Whispers spread among the household staff, whispers of curses, of ghosts, of a mansion marked by sin. They said that at night, they heard footsteps in the courtyard walking toward the fig tree where Domingo used to rest. Some said they heard humming in the corridors, the same melody he used to hum softly, the tune with no known origin. Others said they saw him. Not his face, just a shadow, a silhouette, watching. And maybe they imagined it. Or maybe guilt is a ghost that never needs a body. One night, the household was shaken awake by a scream, sharp, piercing, and full of terror. It echoed through the mansion like a blade slicing through the dark. It came from Elena's room. Servants rushed in. The Marchioness arrived moments later, breathless, clutching her robe tightly. Elena was trembling uncontrollably, pointing at the corner of her room. "He was here," she whispered. "He was standing right there, behind the curtain." There was no one behind the curtain. No footprints. No open windows. Only cold air where the presence had been. But Elena refused to sleep alone after that night. As the months passed, the daughter's conditions worsened. The Marchioness summoned priests, healers, and even doctors. Some proposed prayer. Some proposed medicine. Some proposed silence. None of them helped. Because the real sickness in the house was not madness. It was the truth. A truth buried under aristocratic dignity. A truth that grew heavier with each unborn life forming inside the mansion. The pregnancies made it impossible to hide what had happened. And so the Marchioness crafted a lie, one that she hoped would save the family from ruin. She told society that her daughters had been victimized by an unknown intruder. And in doing so, she sentenced Domingo twice. Once in body. Once in memory. But lies are fragile. They shatter when touched. The daughters refused to repeat the story. Servants cried at night from the guilt of knowing the truth. Rumors spread faster than the Marchioness could contain them. And soon the noble families of Lima began whispering. Whispering about the Marchioness. About her daughters. About Domingo. About the night of the storm. The Marchioness realized she had not buried the scandal. She had fed it. And the more she tried to silence it, the louder the house began to speak, especially at night. The footsteps around the fig tree grew heavier. The unexplained humming grew clearer. Doors opened on their own. Servants refused to work after sunset. The daughters began waking at the same hour, every night, just before dawn. The hour Domingo was taken. The hour he disappeared from their lives. The hour the mansion still remembers. The mansion grew quieter in the daytime, and louder at night. It was as if the house itself waited for darkness to breathe. As the pregnancies progressed, the Marchioness found herself trapped in a cycle of fear. Fear of society, fear of exposure, fear of her own daughters. She wrote letters she never sent, paced halls she no longer recognized, and whispered prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. But the one thing she feared most was the sound she often heard just before dawn. 3 knocks, soft, steady, at her bedroom door. She never opened it. She never dared. Because deep inside she knew who those knocks belonged to. On the morning after one such knock, she walked into the dining room for breakfast and found the youngest daughter staring at her. "Why don't you open the door, Mama?" the child asked innocently. The Marchioness froze. The fork slipped from her hand. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. But the little girl didn't answer. She only tilted her head and smiled in a way the Marchioness had never seen before. That smile haunted her for weeks. The mansion was suffocating under a weight that no one could name aloud. The daughters grew weaker, not physically but emotionally. Their laughter vanished, their conversations dwindled, their footsteps became softer. They moved like ghosts through the halls as if they had stepped into another world, a world Domingo had been forced into. One evening, during a sudden rainstorm, the eldest daughter, Isabel, gathered her sisters in the old library. The room smelled of dust and damp parchment, its shelves filled with books about noble bloodlines, royal law, and the purity of heritage. Books that now felt like poison. Isabel lit a single candle. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried storms. "We need to tell Mama the truth," she said. "We need to stop hiding." Elena shook her head, gripping her sister's arm. "She won't listen. She would rather lose us than face what she's done." Maria stared into the candle flame. "Do you ever wonder if Domingo knew this would happen?" The room fell silent. Because in their hearts, each of them believed he had. He had always been gentle with them, but there was a depth in his eyes, a sadness, a knowing. He had grown up under chains, inside a world where love was forbidden and power was always someone else's weapon. He had learned to read danger long before he learned to read words. And maybe, in the quiet moments when he spoke softly to them, he had sensed how fragile their freedom really was. But knowing is one thing. Escaping is another. No one escapes a world built to crush them. Especially not him. That night the storm grew stronger. Rain struck the windows like fists and thunder echoed through the halls. The daughters stayed together in the library, huddled close, while the candle's flame bent and flickered. Suddenly, a sound. A low, deep creaking. The door to the library slowly, very slowly, began to open. The candle extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room. Isabel gasped. Elena grabbed her sister's hand. Maria stood up, trembling, her silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Footsteps entered the room. Measured, slow, deliberate. The storm outside roared louder as if warning them. "Who's there?" Isabel whispered. No answer. Only the sound of breathing. Heavy. Close. The air in the room grew colder. The daughters felt it settle against their skin, a chill unlike anything the humid tropical nights of Lima ever brought. Another step. And another. Elena whimpered. Isabel pulled her closer. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Except a whisper. So faint they almost missed it. "You know the truth." The daughters froze. The voice was not cruel. Not angry. Not even threatening. It was sad. Fractured. Lonely. A voice they knew. A voice they loved. Domingo. Before any of them could speak, a flash of lightning lit up the entire library. For a split second, just long enough for the world to freeze, they saw him. Not fully. Not clearly. But a dark silhouette standing by the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. And then, darkness again. When the lightning struck a second time, he was gone. The daughters stood trembling, hearts pounding, breaths uneven. They knew what they had seen, and they knew what it meant. Domingo had returned, not in flesh, but in truth. The Marchioness did not believe them at first, until the next morning when she walked into the library and saw the books scattered across the floor. Not thrown, not damaged, arranged. 4 books, 4 titles, 4 messages. One in front of each daughter's usual reading spot, as if someone or something wanted them to read. And the Marchioness recognized the books instantly. They were all from Domingo's secret reading lessons, the books he practiced handwriting with, the stories he tried to understand late at night, the ones he borrowed when no one was watching because slaves were not permitted to learn. The Marchioness felt her knees weaken. Domingo would never have touched those books during life, because if he had been caught reading, he would have been brutalized, or worse. But now he was free from the rules that had bound him. She sank into a chair, clutching her chest. "What does he want from us?" she whispered. Isabel looked at her mother with eyes that no longer belonged to a sheltered noblewoman. "He wants the truth," she said. "And the truth is coming, whether we are ready or not." The Marchioness stared at the 4 books on the library floor, as though they were pieces of a puzzle she had spent her entire life avoiding. The daughters watched her carefully. They could feel the shift in the air, heavy, charged, waiting. Maria knelt down first. She picked up the book placed in front of her seat. When she opened it, something slipped out. A folded piece of parchment, yellowed, soft at the edges, handled many times. She unfolded it. A name was written inside, Domingo, and beneath it, something else. A sentence in shaky handwriting, as if written by a man who had never been allowed to hold a pen. A life in chains still dreams of freedom. Maria pressed the paper to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't cried since the night he'd been taken. Isabel took another book and opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. A dried flower fell out, brown, brittle, long dead. The kind that grows near the coast, close to where Domingo used to fetch water. It was a memory, a quiet one, a small trace of tenderness hidden in a brutal world. Elena picked up the 3rd book, hesitant, almost afraid. But when she opened it, she let out a soft gasp. Inside was a charcoal sketch. Rough, unfinished, but unmistakable. It was her. A small portrait of her face, eyes lowered, hair braided. She remembered the day Domingo had asked her to sit by the fig tree while he practiced drawing. She thought he was sketching the tree, the path, the sky. Not her. She clutched the sketch to her chest and wept. The Marchioness watched each of her daughters unravel as they discovered pieces of Domingo's heart hidden in those books. Though he had lived in silence, under orders, under the eyes of cruel men, he had left behind fragments of himself. Fragments he must have hoped they would one day find. Only one book remained, the one placed in front of the Marchioness's seat. She tried to avoid it, pretending not to see it, pretending her hands weren't shaking. But silence pressed in from every corner of the room, and so at last she reached for it. Her fingers barely brushed the cover, when she froze. Another knock. 3 knocks. Soft, steady. Right on the library door. The daughters stiffened. The Marchioness stopped breathing. The storm outside had passed. The house was still. The sun was shining. There was no reason, no earthly reason, for someone to be knocking. Maria whispered, "He's here again." Isabel stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "Mama, open it." "No," the Marchioness whispered. "I can't." The knocking continued. 3 times. Always 3. The Marchioness rose to her feet, pushed aside her fear and walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the handle. She closed her eyes and opened it. There was no one there. Only the empty hallway stretching into silence. Only the faint smell of earth and damp leaves, the smell Domingo carried after working in the garden. The Marchioness's breath caught in her throat. She felt something inside her, something cold, ancient, and unforgiving, settle over her shoulders like a cloak. She turned back toward the room. "When he lived," she whispered, "I never asked him how he felt, or what he wanted. I never gave him a voice. She looked at the daughters, her eyes filling with tears she had held back for decades. And now, he has come back to speak. The daughters stayed silent. Not out of fear but respect. The house was listening. The Marchioness opened the final book. Inside she found a single sheet of paper, clean, smooth, untouched by time. And written on it in the same shaky handwriting. You knew the truth, and you chose silence. Her knees buckled. The daughters ran to her, guiding her into a chair. She clutched the note like it was burning her. I didn't choose silence, she whispered. I chose survival. But as soon as the words left her mouth, she realized she was lying. She hadn't done it to protect them. She had done it to protect herself. Her title. Her dignity. Her reputation. And Domingo had paid the price. The air in the library grew thick, so thick that the daughters felt their ears ring, their breaths shorten. As if the room had become too small to contain all the truth it had swallowed. The Marchioness placed the note on the table, her hand trembling uncontrollably. What am I supposed to do now? She whispered. No one answered. But something else did. A gust of wind swept through the room even though the windows were closed. The books on the shelves rattled. The candle wick on the table sparked and lit, by itself. All four daughters turned toward the doorway. The hallway was empty. But they felt him. Not a ghost. Not a spirit of vengeance. A presence. A witness. A man whose story refused to die. Elena's lips parted and in a trembling voice she whispered. He wants us to tell the world. The Marchioness looked up sharply. No, she said. We cannot. They will ruin us. Isabel met her mother's eyes with a calmness that seemed impossible for someone carrying so much pain. They already ruined us, Mama, she said softly. What else can they do? Maria stepped forward, her voice firm. He didn't come back to punish us. He came back to free us. The Marchioness looked around the library, the books, the messages, the traces of Domingo's life scattered like breadcrumbs leading to a truth she had refused to face. For the first time, she understood. He wasn't haunting the house. The house was releasing him. And the only way to set him free completely was to speak his name out loud. To break the silence that had killed him. The Marchioness stood slowly, wiping her tears with a trembling hand. She gathered her breath and whispered, Domingo. The candle flame flickered. The air warmed. And somewhere deep in the mansion, a floorboard creaked, as though someone had finally taken a long-awaited step toward peace. The mansion exhaled. A soft, trembling breath through old stone, ancient wood, and memories that had finally been spoken aloud. When the Marchioness whispered Domingo's name, something shifted. Subtle, invisible, but unmistakable. For the first time since the night he vanished, the house felt alive again. And not haunted. Released. But the world outside the mansion was not so forgiving. Word of the daughter's failing health, the family's reclusion, and the strange disturbances in the house had begun to spread through Lima's noble circles. Rumors grew like vines, wild, unstoppable. Some whispered of a curse. Some whispered of a forbidden love. Some whispered of a scandal so catastrophic the Spanish crown itself feared it. And then came the priest. A thin, severe man sent by the authorities under the guise of offering spiritual guidance, though everyone knew his real purpose was to uncover the truth. He arrived at the mansion unannounced, stepping through the doors as if he were walking into a battlefield. I must speak to the Marchioness, he declared. But the daughters blocked his path. Isabel stood in front, chin lifted, no longer the timid noble girl she once was. We don't need your help, she said. Child, the priest replied coldly, sins left unconfessed invite demons into the home. Maria stepped forward. We have no demons here. The priest narrowed his eyes. Then why does the entire city hear whispers of a slave haunting this house? The Marchioness appeared behind her daughters, her face pale but resolute. Because truth cannot be buried, she said. The priest approached her slowly. If what they say is true, the punishment will be severe. Not just for you but for your daughters. The Marchioness felt her daughters trembling beside her. She placed her hands firmly on their shoulders. We have lived in fear long enough, she said. Tell me everything, the priest demanded. Very well, she whispered. And for the first time, in full, unbroken detail, she spoke the truth aloud. About Domingo. About the pregnancies. About the night he was taken. About the silence she chose over justice. When she finished, the priest was silent. His eyes darkened with a seriousness that made the daughters grip each other tightly. Do you realize what this means? He asked. Your family name, your title, it will all be gone. Your daughters will be marked for life. The Marchioness inhaled, gathering her courage. They have been marked since the night he disappeared, she said. The priest lifted his hand dramatically. This is blasphemy. A noble woman, sleeping with a slave? And the daughters. Enough, Isabel snapped. We are not ashamed. The priest recoiled as if struck. You speak as though this man was your equal. He was better than most men we have known, Maria said, her voice a blade. The priest took a step back. For the first time, fear tinged his rigid expression. He sensed the shift, the defiance, the unity that bound this once fractured family together. And then, something happened. The candle beside him flared. Bright, too bright. The flame shot upward, violent, then died instantly. All at once the room grew icy cold. The priest froze. The daughters pressed closer. The Marchioness held her breath. And behind them, a shadow. Watching. No face. No form. Just the unmistakable outline of a man standing in the doorway. The priest stumbled backward. What is this? He cried, fumbling with a cross around his neck. But the shadow did nothing. It did not move. It did not threaten. It simply stood, quiet, patient, its presence heavier than any weapon. The Marchioness stepped forward, her voice steady. Do not fear him, she said. You should fear the cruelty that made him this way. The priest's face twisted with panic. This is witchcraft, he whispered. This family is cursed. No, Isabel replied softly. This family was saved. Before the priest could speak again, the front doors of the mansion burst open. Guards stormed inside, men from the colonial government, armed, hardened, ready. But the shadow vanished. Gone in an instant like a breath returning to the wind. Marchioness, the lead officer barked. By order of the Spanish crown, you and your daughters are to be taken into protective custody pending investigation. The daughters screamed. The Marchioness tried to shield them. But the guards moved too quickly. And then, the house itself reacted. The chandeliers rattled. The paintings on the walls shook. A deep rumble rolled through the floors, like a heartbeat awakening after centuries of silence. The officers froze. One dropped his weapon. Another whispered a prayer. A gust of wind swept through the entrance hall. Impossible, unnatural. And then, the fig tree outside groaned. Its branches scraped the windows with a sound like fingernails on glass. The guards backed away. The priest stumbled toward the exit. Chaos erupted through the house. In the midst of the panic, Isabel grabbed her mother's arm. He's protecting us, she said. The Marchioness looked around, tears streaming down her face. We must leave, she said. Now. But then, a voice echoed through the hall. Not loud. Not angry. Just a whisper carried on the wind. No more running. The family stopped. The Marchioness felt a warmth at her back, a presence she no longer feared. And in a moment clearer than memory, clearer than vision, she realized. Domingo was not there to haunt them. He was not there for revenge. He was not there to frighten. He was there to witness. The guards began shouting orders again, but something stopped them. A sound. A baby's cry. The daughters looked at each other in shock. The Marchioness gasped. The servants ran upstairs and returned with news. Elena had gone into labor. The first child of the 4 had arrived. The guards didn't dare interrupt. The priest didn't dare speak. Even the fig tree outside went still. The house held its breath. Hours later, when the child was finally born, a silence followed. Then laughter. Weak, exhausted, but genuine. The baby was healthy, alive. And when the midwife placed him in Elena's trembling arms, the candle flame brightened. The air warmed. And for the first time since his death, Domingo's spirit was at peace, because in the end, his bloodline had survived. His story lived on. Through them. Through the child. Through truth. When the guards approached again, the Marchioness raised her head high. "Do what you must," she said. "We will not hide any more." The officers hesitated. They had heard the cries, seen the shadow, felt the house tremble. They knew something sacred had happened, something no empire could erase. And so, they stepped aside. The priest fled into the night, muttering of miracles and sins. The guards left quietly, unsure of what they had witnessed. And the mansion finally settled. No more knocks. No more footsteps. No more shadows. Just peace. Years later, when the daughters raised their children, they told them the story, not as a scandal, not as a shame, but as truth. A truth about a man named Domingo. A man who had lived in chains but loved without fear. A man whose voice was stolen but whose legacy refused to die. And in time, people spoke of the Marchioness and her daughters with awe, not disgust. Not because they broke the rules of a corrupt empire, but because they defied them. Domingo's descendants grew. Strong, brave, unafraid. A new lineage, one the Spanish crown could never anticipate. And long after the colonial era faded, long after the mansion crumbled, long after the fig tree withered away, the story remained, whispered across generations, protected by time, cherished by those who understood that truth, once freed, never dies. And somewhere, beyond the world of the living, a man who had lost everything watched over the family he had created, finally free, finally at peace. And his name, still carried in the wind, was Domingo.